Hello everyone and welcome to the Bruno Galan talk show. If you like this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel to not miss any future episodes. I also want to mention I have a Patreon page in the description down below for those who are interested in further supporting it. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Bruno Galan talk show. I'm here today with Mark Barron, who is a writer of novels, comic books. He wrote Punisher in the 80s. He created Badger and Nexus. And I'm currently listening on Audible to a novel he wrote. It's titled Bike, and I'm just starting it, but it's a lot of fun, lots of action, never a boring moment so far. So hi Mike, how you doing?
Hey Bruno, doing good.
Good. Listen, there's a question I gotta ask you, and just so you know, I haven't really listened to your other interviews, haven't had the time. So if there's questions you've already answered a lot of times, like just feel free to let me know, because I don't want my interviews to be like others. But I gotta ask you, like when they used microchip in season 1 of The Punisher on Netflix, did you get any money?
Yes.
Good. Did you get any money during the 90s Spider-Man show when they used microchip?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I just wanted to get that off my chest. So, how's life treating you?
Good.
Good. Any recent projects that you might have on your hat right now?
Oh man. The Saints just came out that I wrote for Allegiance. I don't know if you can see that. Let me show you what it looks like.
Okay.
This is a crowd-funded book.
Okay.
That they sent to their backers, and it's not the comic that's going to appear in Walmart.
Okay. Oh, is that okay? Go ahead.
This is a graphic novel. It's a big fat graphic novel. It's tremendous art.
It is. It looks.
And it's about a group of archaeologists who are fighting to prevent the world's last remaining archaeological sites, the undiscovered ones, from being destroyed by vandals and tomb raiders. And it takes place all over the world. It's very exciting. It stars a rogue archaeologist. It's kind of a cross between Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider, but it's original. And I think the writing will astonish people in that he's certainly better written than Tomb Raider. And the artist is great. I wrote 6 issues. I don't know when they're going to start appearing in Walmart, but as you know, Allegiance distributes in Walmart. Also, Buddy McGill just came out from Advent Studios. Buddy McGill's the James Bond of dogs.
Okay.
It's I teamed up with a great Argentine artist named Fur Kelvy, who just did a knockout job. And let me show you the cover of Buddy McGill.
Yes.
It's kind of unique. Do I have Buddy McGill here? Nah, I don't. But anyhow, Wordfire just published my Nexus novel.
Yes. Okay. That's a character you created in the 80s, and I read the description, and that was like, I imagine for the time, that was quite the departure from the. I mean, I know that it was starting to. The 80s were kind of like the time for authors to start going to darker stuff, but that superhero was pretty. I don't know the application because I didn't get my hands on it yet, but the concept seemed pretty dark, actually. Pretty different from traditional stuff.
We think it's probably the longest-lived independent superhero comic there is at this point, since we've been at it for over 40 years, and we're still publishing. Dude is publishing it. I'm publishing it. Dark Horse is publishing it. We're coming out on numerous platforms. Also, Wordfire Press is going to publish my horror novel, Domain, which is a haunted house story. In fact, it's the last word in haunted house stories. And I don't know if you're aware of our Thin Blue Line campaign, but I've written a graphic novel about 2 police officers trying to survive the night in a riot-torn city. And Fox News had me on their show, Fox and Friends, 2 Sundays ago to talk about it. And as a crowdfunder, that's doing very well. And later this year, in fact, a couple of months, we're going to start the campaign for the 2nd Florida Man graphic novel. Now, as you know, there are 3 Florida Man novels. There's only 1 Florida Man graphic novel that has appeared yet. Where is it? I got all this stuff here, if I could just dig it up. My desk is like an ancient archaeological site.
Oh, dude, you have no idea what my office looks like. It's not for nothing. I have the black background behind me. Nothing as cool as what you have there. They're like boxes and books. It's a mess.
Can't find it. I did find an issue of Nexus, so.
Yeah, that's a beautiful cover.
Looks like that.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
You running an alligator, of course.
The second one's going to be even funnier. The first one was pretty funny.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a bunch of novels. I just turned in my 9th biker novel.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm starting the first of 9 novels.
Yeah, you know, and I wrote that 10 years ago, and I like to think I'm getting better as a writer, so I hope you'll follow me along and let me know. I also started the 10th one because it took me so long to write the last one. I didn't want that to happen again.
Okay. The momentum.
Yeah, a novelist has to write at least 3 novels a year unless they strike gold or catch lightning in a bottle, which is rare, but it happens.
Yeah.
And we see it all the time. Like The Martian was a novel and then a movie with Matt Damon. And the author of that just published that on the internet by himself. And it caught on because I assumed the writing was very good. And the same thing with 50 Shades of Grey. That was just an
Oh my God, don't do
until
this.
it became a book and movie. I know nothing about
Don't
it.
bring that up to me.
But I do know that it's another phenomenon where you write one book and lightning strikes. And the publishing world is filled with books like that, such as To Kill a Mockingbird.
Mm-hmm. But you know, the right now Prime Video is going to start a series on Jack Reacher, and this time a non-Tom Cruise shaped Jack Reacher. And so I imagine that if that works out, they're going to be looking for other like action hero books. And Biker so far kind of superficially, but he kind of reminds me of the Jack Reacher type of book, where it's like it's a traditional archetype of the action hero in a story, and like it's kind of like they're not invincible, but they're certainly not the normal Joe. And
well, that's fair. I think they inhabit the same literary territory. I was inspired by John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee novels, as were so many other novelists. And Josh Pratt, my protagonist, is my version of the Travis McGee type character, except, of course, he's unique to me in that Josh is a reformed motorcycle hoodlum who went to prison and found God in prison and comes out determined to turn his life around. And there's quite a bit set in the world of biker gangs, but most of the stories are not.
Mm-hmm.
The one that Wolfpack is readying to publish is called Con, and it's about how Josh is hired to find a missing tiger.
Okay, that's
that went missing from its tiger sanctuary, and of course the tiger's not out running around. Somebody took it. Yeah, and that's part of the story.
So from Two Little Dogs, that's where I'm at in the series. See, like he's trying to find 2 little dogs, now he's trying to find a tiger. That's quite the.
Well, usually he has to find a person.
Yeah.
Or protect a person, but this one's different.
It's kind of funny because I was kind of like having a try at a short story myself, and it's basically like a bar fight. The short story role. There's like little gimmicky stuff around it to make it like its own thing, but I basically wrote a bar fight. And then when I started listening to your book today, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is the kind of the mood I was in. Like sometimes stuff just has this way of lining up. Like I wasn't that type of mood. But I gotta ask you, to be honest, I have to ask you, when you were younger, have you been in like rough bars, or were you ever in some sort of confrontation there?
No, but I've been training in the martial arts for 45 years.
Okay, because go ahead. Sorry, I'm not going to interrupt, but I have something to add after, because it rang true to me when I listened to it.
Well, that's it. It's probably the hardest thing I've ever undertaken in my life, because I was not a very physical child, and I was not particularly adventurous. But when I was living in Boston, I was about 25 years old. There was a dojo about a half block from my house, and I had always been curious. So one night I just screwed up my courage and I went in there. And I've been at it ever since in a variety of schools, and I'm still training. I trained last week. I'll train next week. I'm no Bruce Lee.
Well, any blue belt in BJJ who can handle a punch and a kick could handle Bruce Lee, which I know is a very sacrilegious thing to say, but I truly believe that.
Yeah.
I mean,
But I
I'm
have
making in trouble for saying this, but
I have put the work in, and I've been punched in the face many times.
yeah. So, so what do you? I'm gonna geek out on martial arts with you now. I didn't even know you trained. I suspected because the thing is, I want to say when I was listening to the again, it's audible, so I'm listening to it, but it's a book, it's a novel. But normally I would read, but time, and I didn't have time to wait for the book to arrive. Um, it just rang true to me as someone who understands fighting, because there's a lot of books I really like, but it's clear to me that the writer has no clue about fighting. And I can still enjoy it. For example,
That's one of the reasons I started training. I began collecting comics, and even back in the day, I was collecting Master of Kung Fu, which I loved because of Paul Gulacy's art, which blew me away. It was based on Steranko, but it was Steranko on steroids. But even then, before I began seriously training, I knew that what they were showing me were just movie poster poses, that there was no real martial arts. And I wanted to show real martial arts in my comics. I wanted to show the technique unfold in a realistic and dynamic manner that was both exciting and entertaining, but also technically correct. Because usually you just see a fist or a foot waving around and people flying off panel, but there's a lot more to martial arts than that.
God. The amount of times that I see Batman overextend in comics, like he's punching away his face forward and stuff, and I know it's dynamic. I understand it's a dynamic visual, but it kind of he's the world's greatest martial artist in the DC. Well, maybe after Lady Shiva, but he's one of the greatest martial artists in the Marvel, in the DC universe, in the Marvel. And he's like, like overextending, and it always bugs me on some level. I'm just geek like
well,
that.
That's because the artists are probably unfamiliar with martial arts. But I've had the pleasure of working with some very skilled martial artists, including Vale Myerick, with whom I did the Bruce Lee comic for Malibu. And
Okay.
Vale is a very knowledgeable and skilled martial artist. And so I was able to take advantage of his knowledge by putting out fairly elaborate fight scenes. I choreographed my fight scenes very carefully. I want the audience to get a sense of movement and excitement and say that, yeah, not only is this exciting and great, but it could actually happen.
It's correct. Yeah. Again, like biker, I'm at the beginning, and how can I put this? It's not just the fighting was well described to me, like it makes sense. It made sense to me, like this was what happens in a fight scene. I like that the outnumbered hero actually gets like slight spoilers for the very beginning of biker, but he gets his ass handed to him because he's outnumbered. And again, that's the way it was written. Like there wasn't normally. Okay, I'm gonna try to explain this because sometimes you have this feeling in your head and then you have to put it into words. A lot of writers who know fighting less, when their hero is overwhelmed, it's not even because of the numbers. It's more like someone came from behind in a sneaky way. Not just they circle him, or like there was. I don't know how to explain it. It's always like this extra factor, not just the outnumbering. Like the outnumbering shouldn't be enough, But when fighting, the outnumbering is often enough, Like it's just a little detail there. Like when he's finding the little dogs, And again, it was just like. Also the interactions in the bar, like the way people posture was more realistic than other stuff I read about posturing, because the posturing is a thing, but sometimes people who don't know, who've never been in that situation, write about it, and it's kind of cringy to me. So again, like really well written, because that I have been in situations where posturing was a big part of me not getting in a fight. And it's not just trying.
What do you mean by bustering?
Okay, so in biker, when he goes into the bar and he goes to talk to the boss of the bikers there, because he wants to get into the whole dog fighting gambling thing. Well, he wants to save the dog, so he's trying to infiltrate and be invited to the place. And so at first he's met with some like adversity, like he's met with some like resistance and aggression from the bikers there, of course. And that kind of reminded me of one time, but my situation was very different. One time I walked into a biker bar by accident. And to make a long story short, I kind of had to both be respectful and playful, but also not back away, which is kind of like a weird thing. It wasn't like, oh, the action hero walks in and intimidates the bike, like the biker bus in front of everyone. No. And it's not either like, oh, he just acted cool and that was it. Like he actually is sort of playful with the guy, like he's like, oh, that's a nice dog. And I don't remember what the dialogue, but he kind of goes, what's it to you? No, that's just a nice dog. That's it. And like, I like to bet on that one. Like, it's kind of like this playfulness. And when you know how to interact with people in situations that are kind of weird, you actually know that you have to balance those factors out. You can't be too much of one thing. You can't try to intimidate the guy in a position of weakness, but you also can't really, you can't insult really. You can't, it's kind of one of those things where I just found that the interaction rang true to me, where you gotta kind of be likable, but at the same time, not a pushover. And that was the perfect balance of something that made sense to me in situations that have been nowhere near that level, but stuff that happen where you have to know how to be social in a way. Those action heroes very often, like you never see them use social skills in that level. When they're written, it's just like a social skill that's very comic booky. It's just the guy's so tough, everyone's scared, or he walks in and like, oh no, the boss respects him because he sees he's a tough guy. It's not that simple. I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly, but it just felt like something that could happen.
That's what I try to do.
Yeah. Because it's I don't know. I guess it's one of those things, it's one of those things where human interactions have many layers, and I don't know if this is some people, like writers write consciously of many details. Sometimes they just have this instinct for it. But again, I just like that scene. I just like that it came off as this guy knows how to socialize in that environment.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
wait till you get to book number 4.
Okay.
Sons of bitches.
But there's also moments when you do just intimidate and all that, but they're not. It's not a copy paste thing for every occasion, But okay, recently I'm not going to be the first one to ask you about this. That much I've seen with Google. They have, I think, they've taken his guns away for the Punisher, and they changed his logo. And I know you've talked about it elsewhere, but I'm still kind of curious to hear it in your words, because again, I haven't listened to other interviews. But do you think that Marvel is kind of like doesn't know what to do with the Punisher brand right now? It's kind of scared of the Punisher brand at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're trying to cancel the Punisher because he's too macho for today's sensitive times. And I wish they just stop publishing him than going through these ridiculous contortions that they are now with making him the head of a League of Assassins called the Hand, and then changing his logo. And one of the reasons is they don't want police and military appropriating the logo, which I think is stupid. They appropriate the logo out of pride. And certainly our military forces are entitled to use it. I don't know if it's appropriate for police because they're not there necessarily to kill you. But I understand why they do it. And one of the reasons I wrote Thin Blue Line is that I know a number of police officers, and every cop that I know is a civic-minded individual who joined the force to be a positive force in his community. He didn't do it for personal gain or to push people around. We all know they're bad cops, but they're not the cops that I know. And
I've seen both, yeah.
And I suspect that they're in a minority. Certainly there are more bad cops in big cities. But when people started calling for defunding the police, I was incredulous that these people could be in a position of high office and be so bone stupid.
Oh my God, dude! There's because of what happened with George Floyd, which was horrible. But they, in New York, I think they are not forbidden certain chokes, but it's the dumbest thing to do, because actually, if the cop is trained in any sort of grappling, it can do a rear naked choke or whatever, and just make the person just pass out, release, which again, like, because the guy wasn't doing like any technique, he was just like kneeling on the neck, which
Well,
was horrible thing to see, but it's not the same as someone applying a known
right.
technique, because then it leaves the person, well, the cop has no choice but to use his like stick now. You took away his way of putting someone away without harming them. And you know, the whole defund the police, I certainly think there's something to be done with where financing where the budget goes. I have opinions on that, but removing the money away, if anything, you want to put more money for better training. You don't want to, like, of course, where the budget goes is a different story, but
One of the things we're
it was
doing
so
with Thin Blue
frustrating when that
Line
happened.
is we're paying for police officers to train in jujitsu so they can learn to subdue people with no harm to themselves or their
Yes,
subject.
yes,
And Joe Arnold, who drew the book, is a full-time police officer. And Joe's also a very skilled jujitsu player. And so the action sequences in the book are just what we've been describing. They're exciting, they're realistic, and you can say, yeah, you know, why don't more comics take advantage of this? It's drawings on paper. They're as good or as bad as the people who make the comic are willing to make them. And one of my things has always been to show the martial arts in an exciting and dynamic and realistic manner.
Although I would say that I do see, both from video captures and so, like, I do see a lot of undertrained cops or cops who think that just weightlifting is enough. I have, and when I was doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu years ago, I was really happy when this massive cop came in, and I think he was taking so much protein he was always farting. That was kind of a running joke, and he was just massive. That guy. I don't know if he took something else, not my business, but he was really massive, and I think it was a shock to him at first what was happening to him against like normal shaped dudes, you know, like it was just kind of a shock for him. But I was happy he was there because yeah, I don't want cops to rely on their guns. Like, it's certainly a tool that should be used when it's appropriate, but I think when a cop is undertrained physically, um, and that includes, I'm sorry to say, that includes people who just weightlift, um, you know, there's more chances that they're gonna go and do something like with their weapons, and which is appropriate sometimes, but not always. And yeah, so that really pissed me off when when they started, oh, no chokes. I'm like, well, yeah, now they're gonna have to go for weapons. How else are they gonna restrain someone? You know, like,
Well, this is what happens when you elect people with no practical business and who offer no goods or services that anybody wants. But
yeah, I think American
let's stick
politics
to
are.
writing.
I'm a Canadian, but I think American politics are a mess, like, overall. But although everywhere, right? Politicians. Um, but I want to ask you, what are the martial arts that you used to practice now? Like, what are your backgrounds? Because you mentioned a few. You didn't mention them, but you said that you practiced a few.
Well, I train at Karate West in Fort Collins, Colorado. You can look it up, karatewestinc.com. And like any good modern martial arts school, they teach a little bit of everything, including jujitsu,
Hmm.
kung fu, and a lot of boxing, heavy emphasis on boxing.
Okay, good. Yeah, yeah. That's essential for, I think, any karate practitioner who wants to be modern. And you don't have to, you know, people practice for different reasons, but I think, like, when it comes to striking, like, at this point in time in 2022, every striker should know some boxing. Your game doesn't need to rely on it, but, you know, like, I think every striker should know at least a little bit of boxing, you know, like a hook, like an uppercut, you know, like, just stuff like that. Yeah. And so you've been training for how long, have you said?
45 years.
Wow. Oh, that's a long time to train, man.
Gotta do something.
Yeah, well, it's very cool. Um, yeah, for the Punisher, just to go back a little bit on it, which again, I said I didn't want to make you repeat stuff you said elsewhere, but I am a bit curious myself to discuss this. You know, I remember a few years ago, well, many years ago actually now, Josh Whedon had I thought, a really bad take on the Punisher. He was saying the Punisher was a coward because he used guns, and I was like, well, he goes against people who also have guns. That doesn't make him a coward. You know, like, okay, cool if Daredevil and Batman don't use them, that's also cool, but the fact that, like, it's the same, would you say a samurai is a coward because he uses a sword against another sword? You know, that made no sense to me. And then he kind of mocked the Punisher in his run of that kid, superheroes book. Runaways, was it? Like Josh Whedon took over
Joss Whedon
Runaways.
wrote comics.
Hmm?
Do you say Joss Whedon wrote comics?
Yeah. He wrote Runaways for a while, and he did a really stupid scene with the Punisher where he basically just had a Punisher there to say the Punisher said like, "Oh, I've killed children before," with no context, and then like the super powered, really strong hero punches him, and they basically ridicule him. And I was like, I think the Punisher. And I'm gonna tell you, I think by American standards, I'm a leftist. By international standards, I might be a centrist. I'm not sure, but I think a lot of leftists have trouble with the Punisher. They have trouble with him, and
No
yet,
doubt.
huh? But yet, everyone loved the Netflix series, so there's a way to make him appeal like presentable to everyone, if you will.
No.
No? Oh, okay. Go ahead with this. I want to hear this.
Well, he's never going to appeal to leftists.
Yeah, he's never going to be able to.
He's never going to be able to appeal to the left.
Appeal to.
They hate
But
a
what if he goes
strong male
well,
authority figure.
if he goes against the KKK, maybe if you always make him target specific
Right.
enemies, I wonder, because I think that what happened is the Punisher came in an era where crime was different. People had, and again, I say this I try to be unbiased. I think people have it easier these days than they used to. And the Punisher came out at a time where people were dealing with some really, really, like New York was rough, apparently.
New York is 1,000 times rougher now.
Well, yeah, okay. The pandemic happened, and that's a whole other story. But let's, if we rewind a little
it's
bit,
not just the endemic. It was the defund the police movement, which, as I said, is insane.
Well, that happened during. I'm kind of putting everything to this past 2 years together.
Yeah. Certainly, the authorities have used the endemic to impose a top-down dictatorship on this country, and have tried to demonize half the country. But Bruno, let's talk about writing before I get carried away.
Okay. But I do want to kind of just. If you don't want to add anything to it, that's fine. But I think that what happened too is like maybe, and yeah, the last 2 years have been pretty crazy. But before then, life was cozy. I think it got to a point where like North America got pretty cozy, and back then people were kind of more frustrated. I think in the 80s with like just crime rates and stuff like that, and they were kind of like just more willing to see a character who would do something harsh. And then when people get cozy, they kind of maybe forget like the whole notion of.
Well, no, the audience is still out there. It's just not being catered to. What's happened is
That's true. That's very true.
The people at the top, the people who control the media, entertainment, education, and government, they don't like it. And because they control the media and entertainment, they seem to have a much louder voice and seem to be a lot more of them than there really are. Mm-hmm. But they're sitting in the catbird seat now. I've said this 1,000 times, but most people have their hands full doing their job, taking care of their family, and maybe kicking back on the weekends and watching a little football. But there's a certain class of person who spends every waking second scheming how to get power over others. And they're good at it. And now they've taken over the country.
I think to go back to a more like, because you did ask me to go back to the writing, so I'm going to do that out of respect. No, but it's true. You did ask me that, and I don't want to push in a direction that you didn't want to.
All right.
Even though I started doing that, I apologize. I think Marvel just shouldn't touch the Punisher if they're going to do him like that, because right now they're making him this ninja. They're changing the logo. I guess he's going to fight with ninja weapons now, which makes no sense for Frank Castle. And I mean, like, just don't do the Punisher. Just wait for another time in comics or something. Like, what's the point? And yeah, that's just weird. But I see, by the way, I see Valiant Comics behind you, the crossover Valiant and Dark Horse. So you mentioned Dark Horse, so Nexus is on the Dark Horse side. Did you at all interact with Jim Shooter at some point during that crossover?
Well, I know Jim, and we've run into each other at a number of cons, and we talk, but I've never worked for him.
Okay, I was wondering, because Valiant seemed like a very interesting time in comics, because everyone always goes back to Image. but I always thought that Valiant was interesting, and for a moment, and I don't know why it didn't really take off that much, but it did for a moment, and then it was kind of gone. And
Well, it's still around. It's like
yeah,
they're still publishing. But
yeah,
I
it's
don't
true.
know.
It's true.
I
They
read
are.
very
That's
few
true.
comics.
Yeah, it's true. They are. But like in '90s, it seemed like at some point that they really had like this presence for a while. So what can you tell me about Badger? Because that's the one I didn't have time to Google. I see him in the background
Badger
there.
Badger is a multiple personality, only one of whom is a costume crime fighter. And this, there's 7 personalities, and he's the most fun character to write. He's probably my favorite comic book creation to write because you can do anything you want with him. You can be serious, and we have been very serious, or you can be funny and bouncing off the walls, and we've done a lot of stories like that, and bouncing off the walls. And I turned him into a novel too.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to adapt this into a graphic novel when I get the time. Uh, Badger is currently dormant. I think the last series came out about 5 years ago, but I have plans to revive him. And I got a great artist working on it, and I'm looking forward to more Badgers. But there's well over 100 Badgers that we published. We started with Capital, then we went to First, and then Dark Horse published him for a little bit. I did a number of Badgers through both IDW and Image, and now I'm back at First. And if I publish future Badgers, it'll probably be with First or with First in conjunction with another publisher.
And how would you? I mean, I guess there's a comparison to be made. How would you compare him to? I think part of it you already said he can be a bit more comical if needed in certain stories. But how would you compare him to Moon Knight, for example, who also has this whole multiple personality deal going on?
Well, I wouldn't know. I haven't read enough Moon Knight to form an opinion, but
Okay.
I don't look at other comics. I try not to draw inspiration from them. Sometimes I'll get an idea from them. Sometimes I'll get emotional. As I explained, one of the reasons I brought martial arts into comics was because I was disgusted with what they were presenting as martial arts in comics. But Badger is sui generis. And I have 3 rules as a writer. My first rule is it's my job to entertain, and I never lose sight of that fact. And that's why my books do entertain, because that's my number 1 goal.
Dude,
Number
Biker
2
is super fun right now. I barely started, but it's really fun.
Number 2 is to show, don't tell, which seems very simple on the face of it, especially with a visual medium like comics. But apparently it's not so simple, because we've all picked up comics which have huge blocks of prose on every page, like
Yes.
Soviet apartment buildings or an apartment building in Hong Kong, these huge blocks of words after words.
Yeah.
Because the writer doesn't know how to advance the story visually, or else the writer has a lecture to deliver about his personal feelings. You got to be careful of that, because that's not part of entertainment. I mean, you can always work your personal view into the story, but you have to be subtle about it, and you have to show, don't tell. And my third rule is to be original. And we're all unique human beings. And by that, I mean, I bring my personal observations and worldview to what I write necessarily. But it's also the writer's job to imagine every point of view. And a writer who can't do that really has no business writing a novel.
That's interesting what that you said, because even sometimes if I'm not going to give any examples, but I've come across writers that maybe I agree with them mostly, but I despise how they present it. And that's interesting, right? Because they should just be really happy to see an opinion I agree with on the page. But I might even appreciate more an opinion I disagree with that's written a bit more level-headed. If the opinion overall is there's writers that what they do, they twist reality to present their opinion in the end. And I respect more if someone has something to say. I don't need to agree with it. If it's well crafted, I'll respect it. Like if it seems plausible, if the people involved are like actual people. And you can even dabble a little bit in many sides of the argument. And yeah, a writer will have at the end his opinion or her opinion or whatever of what their take is. But I think these days there's a lot of like masturbatory writing where people just want to see something they agree with, and quality is going to go out the window. And I'm saying this again, like, we're talking a little bit about our opinions and all that, but I think like quality should come first, and
Storytelling.
entertainment and storytelling, entertainment, um, some level-headedness to how you're going to approach the subject matter, like, and yeah, sometimes it's not there. Yeah.
Well, people who write, as you describe, they seldom hit the bestseller lists. The books that we're talking about, you mentioned Jack Reacher earlier.
Yeah.
Well, that fellow knows how to entertain. By the way, there, as you mentioned, there's a Jack Reacher TV series in the works. Do you know who Jack Carr is?
Mm-hmm.
Jack Carr is an ex special forces agent who's turned novelist, and his first book was a smash, just a huge smash. And he's got 2 subsequent novels out starring the same character, and now that's being turned into a TV series starring Chris Pratt. And
Really?
I'm excited about it because I've read his books.
How do you spell the
Jack
last name?
Carr, Carr.
Okay.
Let me
I'll look it up.
Just find out what he's written.
Yeah. Oh, you have an old school keyboard. I love those. Like, I want my keyboard to make noise,
Former Navy SEAL, The Devil's Hand, Order Now. His first book was The Terminal List. Got me hooked. It's wonderful stuff. The second one is True Believer. I'm reading that now.
That sounds like a Stanley book.
Savage Son is the third one, and The Devil's Hand is the fourth one.
Okay. And they're are they sorry, are they like action books, set in civilian life?
Very much so. This guy knows his stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, when he describes a sniping, he talks about the equipment and the conditions and what he has to do to get the shot right. And action fans love that kind of stuff. If you're looking for men's action novels, not that it's totally men. I mean, there are women in there. He has a romance. We haven't gotten to the women in the new novel yet because he's still running for his life. But if you ever read any John D. MacDonald, I can't recommend him highly enough.
I'm going to write that down.
He was one of the great pulp writers in America. And his character, Travis McGee, shall live forever. You may not know the name.
You mentioned the name a few times, yeah.
But you've seen Cape Fear, right?
Actually, I haven't.
Oh, well, there are 2 versions of the movie, and that's based on a John D. MacDonald novel.
Okay, I'm going to have to look those up because I'm enjoying Bikers so far. So if those are like things that you enjoy in that vein, I certainly look it up. I do think that the oh my God, how can I put this? I think we're in an era where people want to feel like heroes, but they don't want to put in they don't want to deal with the uncomfortable side of it. And so, a lot of people will spend a lot of time online, and they're gonna do this like moral policing online.
Oh yeah.
And then they think they have this feeling because look, in my life I've been in some fights, and when you help a girl from someone who's going to attack her, you feel good about yourself after. You feel like you had a role in society that day. You feel like you did, that you had a purpose in that moment. You were happy you were there. Maybe something unpleasant happened, but then afterwards, it's a really weird thing where you really feel good about yourself because you were there to help, and it gives you purpose. And I think these days with the internet, a lot of people fabricate that feeling artificially. Sorry, my accent is taking over now. They're kind of like fabricating a feeling by doing some like moral policing online. They're not really doing anything. They're not really helping anyone. They're just like typing on the keyboard, and not in a cool way like writing a story like you do. And then I think they hate examples of someone who actually does stuff, or someone who actually gets their hands dirty a bit. They hate those examples. They don't like them because it kind of shames them. It makes them realize like what I'm doing has no purpose. It's not really helping anyone. and they want to retreat into that. So, I kind of have this really big cathartic enjoyment of like old school heroes in a way. I don't know if old school is the proper term, but
Well, they're violating the second rule, which is to show, don't tell. They're all over the internet telling people what a badass they are, but they're not really doing
oh no, they don't even do that, because being a badass would be toxic masculinity. It's
I suppose.
I mean, as fan of martial arts, I don't know if you've had that kind of thing happen to you, but I guess you, being a writer and all that, maybe you don't have to deal with working in an office per se, but me in the past, there's that coworker, the guy who's like really slim and really like dresses really well, and he looks at me, he's like, why do you do those things? Why do you go get punched in the face or choking each other? And well, why do you even do that? I'm like, okay. And I like it. I just leave it at that. Why should I explain it? And that's fine if not everyone has to like that. I get that. Not everyone's the same. But everyone has a role. And right now, society is kind of trying to stifle a role. And what I find interesting is, in the same workplace, let's say at some point like this female coworker comes to me, and like she come and we talk every day, but I'm never the guy she comes to talk to first. That was years ago, but I'm never the guy she would come talk to first. And then suddenly she tells me about this crazy guy in the metro who was shouting and threatening people and all that. And suddenly she goes, I was wishing you were there. And that told me so much. That told me so much about human beings right now in the modern world, where they will criticize that kind of behavior up until they need it, right?
Right.
Someone might say they fund the police up until they need to call the police, for
Right.
example. So again, and it's really weird to me. I think people don't have balance right now. I'm trying to find ways of saying it that are not too harsh, but I think there is a lack of balance in how people view certain things, and society does need door kickers, if that makes any sense. And you want the good ones, because if you chastise the good ones up until they're gone, the only door kickers left are going to be the bad ones.
There's an old saying: strong men make good times make weak men, and weak men make bad times.
Yeah, I get that, and I agree, and I'm pretty progressive. Like if some man wants to be non-traditional, I have no issue with that. But then again, like I think it's important for the traditional man to also be there. And that's kind of like the whole deconstruction of how can I put this? Because I'm looking at the Punisher, I'm like, okay, they took away his guns. It's very symbolic, isn't it? I'm not making commentary on gun laws, by the way. I just mean the whole thing about they took away something that's so important to the concept of what this guy does, right? And I'm pretty sure he's still going to be killing people with his sword. So I don't know what the real difference is in the end for those writers, how they see it as better. But he's still going to be maiming people, I hope. I hope he doesn't just start kicking them in the balls or something. But yeah, I don't know. So I really like novels like Biker right now. It's almost like this thing where I'm like, I get this cathartic release from all the idiocy I see online these days.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna start recommending it to people. I might do a review online on another channel I have for geek reviews and stuff. Yeah, very well might. How do you see characters? You also wrote Batman, a few stories. How do you see characters like him who are certainly like let's call him macho, but not like in the Punisher kind of way? Like he's not gonna kill someone. Like how do you see that type of character?
Well, Batman's one of the iconic characters, and there have been some great Batman stories. He's had many great writers. He's had many more bad writers. I don't know what's going on with Batman these days, but I do know that to date there are probably 45 million Batman stories, and it would not be a bad idea for him to go on hiatus for a few years to allow whoever's going to write him to clear their vents and clear their filters and come back with a good story. And that doesn't mean a fresh idea or a reimagining of Batman. He doesn't need to be reimagined. He just needs to be well written.
I think the thing with Batman right now is they keep messing with the status quo with the kind of like the basics of the concept. And sometimes you have to do that in comics. But you also have to know when to give it a pause and go back to the basics. And then you do a little something, you know, like the death of Superman, like whatever. Like sometimes you shake things up, but you can't be shaking things up every month of the year.
Right.
Because then you lose that archetypal essence of the character. And for example, I'm gonna give this example of they make weird decisions lately, and I find myself I don't want Batman to go away because I love reading Batman. And right now what I realize is that the comics I'm enjoying most about Batman are out of continuity comics. So there's the Batman Reptilian by Ennis. There's Tom Taylor wrote this Batman Detective that's kind of like this sort of Dark Knight Returns, but not the same continuity, but in that vein where he's just older. And so I'm just enjoying these Batman stories that kind of stand on their own. And then when I go back to the main continuity, it's kind of like a bit of a mess because, for example, they killed Alfred, which is a dumb idea. You don't kill Alfred because he has a very important role to play, to the point where as soon as they killed him, like the next month, like Lucius Fox was basically being Alfred. It's almost like the script was rewritten for Alfred and they just switched it around. I'm like, what's the point of killing Alfred if you replace him with, if Lucius Fox becomes Alfred instead of being Lucius Fox? And it was just like, okay, it's yeah, you want to shake things up, and I think the problem is a lot of writers just want to leave their stamp, but these characters will always return to the status quo, so you have to also respect that on some level. Like the Punisher, okay, has now he's a ninja. At some point he was Frankenstein's monster. At some point he was a hitman for angels. At some point they made him black for a few issues, which is super offensive.
Yeah, it was me.
That was you.
It wasn't my idea. It was the editor's idea.
Oh my god, I didn't know that. Okay, I got.
It wasn't my idea, but I'll stand behind it. I'm
Okay.
proud of those stories.
Okay, please. I gotta know more about this. Okay, so the editor came to you with that idea.
Yes, he did. He was, for 3 years I wrote it as straight crime comic. There were no superheroes, science fiction, or monsters. It was under Carl Potts, who asked me to write the book. But then Carl got kicked upstairs and I got a new editor. And the new editor was a gimmick guy. I don't know if you remember this because it's probably before your time, but you're obviously familiar with this one storyline. The new editor was responsible for the plain brown wrapper cover. Do you remember that? Probably not.
No.
But he had a lot of gimmicks, and one of them is we got to turn the Punisher black. And now it's not as far-fetched as it seems, because there was a book that was written in the 60s by a reporter called Black Like Me. It was a white reporter who took a chemical that turned his skin darker so that he could pass for black and go into black communities and experience it as one of them. And then he came out and wrote about it. It was a shocking book at the time. His revelations showed that racism was alive and well. But this was in the 60s.
Okay.
So it's not as far-fetched as it seems. And not only that, but we have white people today who claim to be another ethnicity for their own personal aggrandizement and
my
profit.
My grandfather was Native American. You're white.
Well, like Elizabeth Warren, who's a senator from Massachusetts who claimed to be part Indian.
Sounds familiar. I think I heard about that.
She claimed, I forget what race she claimed, but they said, no, we've gone through all our records, not a bit of it. And she's never been held to account for that. And there was a woman named Rachel Dolezal in Washington who claimed to be black, who formed her own Black Power group and started collecting money until it was revealed that she was 100% white. And then there's Sean King. I call him Show Enough King. Some people call him Talcum X. Who's another white man passing as black for his own personal aggrandizement and profit.
Yeah, that's so gross. It's so weird. Okay, so the story will basically an editor asks you to write it, and then you kind of craft a story around it. Okay, because I was like, like when I like to me it was just a concept, because what they could have done instead is just like do an out of continuity story where you make in that continuity is black, for example, or just having me be replaced for a while or something. But like to me, it just always seemed weird. I mean, I'm just gonna already said my piece, so I can't rewind that. But yeah, it was always just weird to me. But I guess when you're a writer for a big company and the editor is like, "Oh, I want you to do this," um, yeah, I guess you do what you can to make it work within what you're given. Like
Yeah.
I think I think a lot of I'm careful not to blame writers for stuff that happens in comics because on the back of my head there's always the
Well,
we don't know what the editors
I'm
are.
not blaming Dawn.
Okay,
I was happy to do it.
okay, very well. That's fine.
And whenever anybody brings that up on Facebook, I post the pictures. I own it.
That's okay. People don't need to agree on everything, but um, at the end of the day, I think also there's something to be said about writers have to take risks, and not everyone's going to agree on whether it worked or not, or like, but one thing I try to be careful with is these days, like if a writer does something and for someone it didn't work, they kind of like attack the character of the writer, which I find kind of like disgusting behavior. Like I can look at something and be like, okay, this worked for me or it didn't work for me, but it, what do you think, like as a writer these days with the internet and everything, or I don't know if you care about it at all, maybe you don't, but do you ever write at this point with an eye for how is this going to be perceived in this day and age?
No,
No?
I
Okay.
try not to do that. And I've been the subject of cancel crusades. A number of us have. And we all know that the internet has had a coarsening effect on our culture, a massive coarsening effect, particularly these social sites. Such as Facebook and Twitter, where anonymous keyboard warriors will attack people they don't like.
Yeah.
And there's no way to retaliate. And in fact, if you do retaliate, you lose. You don't want to get down in the mud and wrestle with a pig.
No, because then they really like hold on to it. Yeah.
Right.
I had a guest on my show, and he does this podcast about D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, but like old school rules, and he does like this like kind of story and Tale of the Manticore, John from Tale of Manticore, and he on Twitter he has a Twitter to promote the show, and of course he starts following people in the same hobby. And then at some point he got big enough where people started contacting him about, hey, do you know that you're following this person? Like, do you know that you follow this person? You kind of like go see who you follow, and they're gonna
Oh,
be like,
yeah.
yeah. And he was wise. He just kind of ignored it, and he told me about it. He was like, I felt stressed. I felt like I
Sure.
was. Well, I don't remember how he said it, but he admitted it caused him some stress because it was like, what's going on here? And then but he's so smart, he just ignored it and it moved on because they cannot test the waters. They see if they got you.
Right.
And if you go like, oh, I didn't know, I'm gonna write an apology, I'm gonna do this, and very often it plays on either intimidation or the goodwill of the person, and then they got their claws into you, and now you're in the radar. Yeah, like, whereas if you just kind of like ignore it, um, for example, like there's this writer, James Desborough. Again, he mostly does tabletop role-playing stuff, but he's written a few stories as well. He's always arguing on Twitter, so of course, like the cancel culture really goes after him because they and Twitter's an awful place to have a conversation anyway, because you have this limit, and then the replies are hidden on auto replies, and it can go into two branches of conversation. It's designed for people to argue. It's not designed for people to
Yeah,
have
that's right.
conversations that are that where each other are gonna be able to understand each other. So and it's actually hurt him a lot, I think, financially, because um, people can say whatever they want about him. They've said a lot of lies, stuff that's not true, like, or they take a screenshot of a quote out of context, um, and then it's one of those things where um, yeah, people who have nothing better to do kind of weaponize, and again, I'm like, okay, you don't need to. You might not agree with people on everything, but don't go after their money. Don't go after their livelihood. It's like, do you think you're being heroic by taking someone's like meal away from their table? I don't know.
these are people with no lives of their own who do this. Well, that's not entirely true, because we all know, at least in the world of comics, of notable creators who attack other creators.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think there's a misconception, again, when people are not, like, they admire these heroic figures who stand up for the right thing. So I think in every comic book fan and writer and all that, there's a desire to be that kind of character. But they don't have the outlet, when you don't have an outlet for that desire to be heroic. They're writing stories, so they feel like they participate. And you know what? I think every comic book writer on some level participates in bettering the world, because I was never a religious person, but Batman, no joke, was a big part of my morality these days. Spider-Man, Batman, like these characters, and I don't need to agree with every single moral tenet that these characters have, but it's kind of like a morality tale of you do the right thing when you can. You don't just turn away from stuff, and every time that I've gone toward trouble instead of walking away when other people pretend not to see it, and that's because I just loved Batman comics when I was 8 years old and onward, and so I think comic book writers participate in the mythology and in morality, and maybe these are, I think, lessons for sure in some level. I think they have a lot of value. Anyone who says like, "Oh, it's just about violence," like, no, there's a lot more there. These are heroes for people to follow the example of, and maybe not to their level. I'm not gonna go like, get myself killed, but at the level that I can, at the level in which I exist, and what's going on around me, at that level, I can certainly try to help. So I do think that writers who write those stories are important. But I wonder how some of them start maybe thinking, oh, these heroes wouldn't stand up for this, and neither will I. But then they kind of start, instead of addressing something bad when they see it, they start looking for the bad. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've seen it happen.
Yeah. Have you like had any burned bridges with other creators, other writers?
Yeah, but I'm not going to go into any details. I've had friends, good friends. We would go riding together. We'd stay at each other's houses, and they found out I was conservative and completely cut me out of their lives. Also, lifelong friends that have nothing to do with comics.
Did you? We can change the subject if you want, but did you try to talk to them, or
No.
did you just no? You just accepted?
I have written a couple, and I said, "What's up? Why aren't you responding to me?" And there was no response. And I know they got the mail, and one of them was a very popular artist, and I went to his Facebook page that was maintained by an administrator, and I said, "Has anybody heard from X? I've written him and I'm not getting any response." And the administrator wrote me back and said, "You'll figure it out," and then he blocked me.
When do you think when's the time where you're somewhat older than me? When do you think the divide really took place?
Well, it's been happening gradually for a long time, but I think that it accelerated in the 80s and 90s. And I think that it's big tech has exacerbated this divide tremendously. Big tech is responsible for so much of the rancor and depression that we experience today. because of channels like Twitter and FB, which change their rules chaotically, minute by minute, second by second, and that big tech has chosen to censor half the country. And that's why these alternate sites are springing up and people are going to them.
Yeah.
But I am very careful what I post. I have certain rules: no ad hominem attacks, no sarcasm. I don't get into food fights. And I don't use these sites to attack anyone, because I'm a creator, and as a writer, I'm trying to cast as wide a net as possible.
Thank you. I don't understand how it goes over the head of so many creators these days. Yeah, I just do not understand.
Well, I think a lot of them have been very successful, and they feel that their success puts them on a platform where they're able to show contempt for a certain portion of their audience and pay no price. But I think that's changing now, because I know of a number of professional writers who have been very successful, and then they displayed their anus to their audience, and they got in a lot of trouble, and some have lost their gigs because the parent company says we simply can't have our freelancers insulting our customer base like this. But that's usually been the rarity. But as you know, I mean, there's so many movie stars that I used to admire that have said such awful things that I can no longer just accept them as the character they want to be. I just see them as these vicious people. And, you know, I'll name one: Alec Baldwin.
What did he say?
Yeah, I mean, Alec Baldwin has been saying awful things for years to his own family and to anybody who disagrees with him. And I remember when Dick Cheney accidentally shot somebody on a hunting trip, and Alec Baldwin was merciless, calling Dick Cheney a killer, and he has to be locked up. Well, now Alec Baldwin is an actual killer. He actually shot the cinematographer on the movie he was working on. It was called Rust. You know about this, right?
Yeah, he was given a gun.
And to this day, he denies any responsibility. But what goes around comes around, and nobody's buying it, and various parties are suing him, and the police are investigating. And all I can say is he made his bed. Now he's going to lie in it.
Yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind. I mean, I personally don't think you will. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. But I think it's people are out there judging. No, like, and I think there's this fallacy where they really think they're squeaky clean. They really think, and you know, like, it's kind of like if you try to point out, look, humans are complex. None of us are perfect. We all have stuff that sometimes can go wrong, or we're going to say the wrong thing at some point, or maybe, you know, whatever it is. And then they go like, oh, well, that reflects on you. And then, like, eventually they, you know, they mess up, and, you know, so yeah, I mean, if you go after someone, because I don't know the story about the hunting trip, but yeah, in hunting trips, I imagine these things can happen. You know, accidents can happen because you're carrying weapons. Everyone who went there understood they were in an area where weapons were being used, and it's kind of like if you go skiing, you might fall and get yourself hurt. Everyone knows if you go skiing, you might get hurt.
Well, you know, what's astonishing to me is that someone who's made a lot of action films that involved firearms, that Alec Baldwin doesn't know the first rule of handling firearms, which is to always assume the weapon is loaded.
Don't point it. Yeah. Well, I don't know, because I think it's the same he was supposed to use. The way I heard it is that it was kind of like the director who was cutting corners, and he didn't keep the team that's supposed to take care of that during the filming.
Well, I think that the armorer also lacked experience, so there's a lot of blame to go around. It's not solely Baldwin's fault, except in the sense that he pointed the gun and pulled the trigger.
Yeah,
he should have known better. He should have tested it first. I'm going to have to cut out on you now, but we can continue this at a later date if you like.
Sure, you're always welcome to come back, and By then, I might have read a few more biker novels or whatever else, and I might be able to go more into detail with some of those. But yeah, thank you for coming to the show, and yeah, like thank you for opening up about some stuff that is a bit more touchy, maybe. And but yeah, I'm really enjoying the novel, and I'm definitely gonna continue listening to it. So where can people find you online?
On Twitter, I'm at Bloody Red Baron. On Facebook, I recommend the comics and novels of Mike Baron. I have a website, bloodyredbaron.com. I'm on Substack as Mike Baron. And if you go to Amazon, you type Mike Baron, all my books will come up. You have to wade through 30 pages of other people's books sometimes, but they're mostly my books.
Very well, and I'll put links down there. So
Thank you, Bruno.
yeah, well, thank you for coming, and yeah, let's do it again. Everyone,
All right.
thank you for watching.